Chapter 41 First Slave Acquired, 2, You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lang Yen felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Lang Yen felt her anger boiling over as she heard Zhang Wei's words. I would rather die than do it with you, she screamed, her voice filled with fury. Zhang Wei simply smirked, knowing that he was only using a simple negotiation tactic combined with manipulating people's expectations from worst to a little less worse. He laughed and said, Don't worry, officer. You fierce ones are not my type. Just say, I am willing to be your slave, and you are free to leave, he said, pointing the phone at her to record her response. Lang Yen was dumbfounded. Why would I say that, she asked, her voice filled with confusion and disbelief. Even though it was humiliating for her to say those words, she realized that it was nothing compared to what she had already suffered at his hands or what could have happened if she didn't comply. She took a deep breath and tried to steady her nerves. Zhang Wei chuckled once again, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Ho ho! Did you grasp my secret plan, he said, clearly enjoying Lang Yan's discomfort. To make you say some magical words and convert you into my slave. Tsk. You are quite clever, officer. Lang Yan gritted her teeth as she finally realized Zhang Wei's motives. Her anger boiled over, and she couldn't contain her fury any longer. You sadistic bastard, she cursed, her voice filled with venom. She noticed that Zhang Wei was pointing the camera at her, which meant he would record her saying those words and enjoy them in his free time. The thought made her feel even more violated and humiliated. But even as she cursed him, she realized that it wasn't a bad deal. She had to negotiate with him if she wanted to get out of this situation alive. Would you delete the pictures if I follow your words, she asked, trying to sound calm and collected. Zhang Wei pretended to have a thoughtful expression, then nodded. Sure, why not, he said. I already have the mental image of it in my mind, so it shouldn't be an issue. Lang Yen felt a wave of disgust and humiliation wash over her as she realized that Zhang Wei had been staring at her naked pictures. She cursed him in her mind, wishing she could wipe the images from his mind and erase them from existence. But she knew she had to keep her cool if she wanted to survive. She took a deep breath and tried to push her anger aside. She knew that she would need a clear head if she wanted to outsmart this monster and come out alive. Lang Yan's mind raced as she spoke the words that made her skin crawl. As long as I can get out of here and find Mei, we can easily defeat this bastard, she thought, determined to stay strong and focused. After a moment of silence, she gritted her teeth and spoke the words that Zhang Wei wanted to hear. I am willing to be your slave, she said, her voice shaking with anger and humiliation. Once she had spoken those words, a wave of humiliation washed over her as she realized she was being recorded by Zhang Wei. She felt violated and powerless, but she knew that she had to stay strong if she wanted to escape this nightmare. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, focusing on the thought of Mei and how much she wanted to be reunited with her. She knew that she had to bide her time and wait for the right moment to strike. Until then, she would do whatever it takes to survive. Zhang Wei seemed confused as Lang Yen spoke the words he wanted to hear. It isn't working, he muttered, clearly disappointed. Lang Yen felt a small glimmer of satisfaction at his disappointment, but her joy was short-lived as Zhang Wei quickly realized the problem. Officer. Your words are not heartfelt, he said, turning to her with a sneer. Say it from your heart. Lang Yen clenched her fists, feeling her anger boiling over at his audacity. How dare he ask her to say those words with sincerity? How could anyone feel anything but disgust and hatred for a person like Zhang Wei? But she knew she had to stay calm and focused. She took a deep breath and tried to center herself, focusing on the thought of Mei and how much she wanted to be reunited with her. With a heavy heart, she closed her eyes and spoke the words Zhang Wei wanted to hear, this time putting all of her emotions into them. I am willing to be your slave, she said, her voice filled with anger and loathing. Zhang Wei seemed satisfied with her response, but once again nothing happened, making him click his tongue in annoyance. Say it from your heart, officer. You aren't sincere enough. Leng Yan's face twitched with anger as Zhang Wei taunted her once again. She wanted to lash out at him, to tell him how much she loathed him, but she knew she had to stay calm and focused. She spoke the words again, this time with less emotion. I am willing to be your slave, she said, her voice flat and monotonous. Zhang Wei was not satisfied with her response. Say it again, I can't feel it, he commanded, his voice filled with excitement. Leng Yan felt like crying as she repeated the words again and again, each time feeling more and more violated and humiliated. I am willing to be your slave. This went on for what felt like hours until finally, the slave seal finally worked on her. Villain system. User status. View your current level, experience points, and abilities. System shop. Purchase powerful artifacts, potions, and equipment to aid you on your quest for dominance. Quest log. View available quests and their rewards. Complete them to earn experience points and unlock new abilities. Inventory. Can be used to store non-living items. Slaves. All the user's slave would be displayed here. Update the system to access more options. Points needed for update. 100k villain points. Villain points available. 100 points excess yang essence. 0 == Slaves. 1. Leng Yan. Age. 23. Female. Initial stage of core formation realm == Zhang Wei nodded, finally feeling a connection to Leng Yan. He couldn't help but feel relieved that she had finally noticed him. On the other hand, Leng Yan did not feel anything at all. She looked at Zhang Wei and frowned, wondering why he was so happy. Why is this bastard so happy? After a moment of silence, Leng Yan demanded, if you are satisfied, delete the photos now. Surprisingly, Zhang Wei did not decline her request, and pushed forward the phone to her. Leng Yan quickly deleted all her pictures and handed the phone back to Zhang Wei. Zhang Wei saw her rush and felt like laughing. He had promised to delete the pictures, but that didn't mean he wouldn't save them somewhere else. He already had a copy of them, safely tucked away in a secured folder. He knew that he could use these pictures against her if she managed to somehow escape the slave seal. As a villain, the last thing he cared about was upholding his words. He was willing to lie whenever he needed to get what he wanted. Villain points +20. Ignoring the notification that appeared on his screen, Zhang Wei's face lit up with excitement as he looked at Leng Yan. Where did you learn that ice technique? He asked, his tone laced with curiosity. Leng Yan frowned and snorted, why would I tell you? Suddenly, Leng Yan's lips parted on their own and she spoke in a strange, otherworldly voice. I learned it from Leng Mei. She was the one who taught me cultivation. Leng Yan's eyes widened in shock as she realized she had lost control of her own body. She looked at Zhang Wei in horror and demanded, What did you do to me? Zhang Wei saw the look of disbelief on her face and let out a cold laugh. Didn't I tell you already? Magical words to make you my slave, he said, his words dripping with malice. Leng Yan's heart sank as she processed what had just happened. It was as though she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Why you were serious? She stammered. Zhang Wei's grin widened. Of course I was. From now on, you are my slave and you can't resist any of my orders, he said, his voice filled with triumph. Leng Yan felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized the gravity of the situation she was in. She was now at the mercy of this villain and there was nothing she could do to escape him. The color drained from Leng Yan's face as she imagined her life as a slave of Zhang Wei. She felt trapped and helpless, like a bird caught in a cage. With a determined look on her face, she gathered every bit of energy within her and tried to inspect her body for any signs of the curse that had been placed upon her. However, her attempts were futile and Zhang Wei sneered at her. Even Lang Mei can't remove it, let alone you, he said, his words filled with malice. His words caused a wave of despair to wash over Lang Yan's face. She felt like her world was falling apart and there was no hope left for her. With panic in her heart, she tried to think of multiple ways to escape from this horrible situation. In the end, she even tried to cut her own tongue, but her body refused to cooperate, making her face even paler than before. She realized that there was no way out of this and she was trapped forever in this living nightmare. Zhang Wei shook his head, feeling bored with the situation. He didn't want to spend any more time here, so he got past Lang Yan, not forgetting to spank her ass as he left. Lang Yan's eyes opened wide in shock, but before she could utter a single sentence, Zhang Wei's voice rang inside of her mind. The next time we meet, you better keep your ass oiled. Also, clean up this warehouse and make sure no one finds out about the dead. Zhang Wei had other things to do, so he didn't linger around there. He directly moved to the dive bar, leaving Lang Yan behind to deal with the aftermath of the mess he had made. Needless to say, Zhang Wei felt quite thrilled passing orders like this. Lang Yan, who was left alone, looked at the pile of flesh scattered around her, not knowing what to do. In the end, she tried to search for the slave seal in her body a few more times, only to fail miserably. Note: I got contract for the Psychopath's Harem, TPH, novel, for few days I would be focusing on it. Would it affect this novel update frequency? Slightly, as writing this one is easy compared to TPH, so it shouldn't affect much. Chapter 42 The Dragon Lady. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A/N. The chapters would be limited to 1,600 words, as anything past that too fast passes. Just doing preparations in advance, as I realized this problem just now. Zhang Wei made his way back to the bar. The scene there was still chaotic, but a few people were now starting to come around. Suddenly, Tang Bo appeared, looking panicked and worried. Brother, what happened? He asked, with a quiver in his voice. Zhang Wei could see the concern etched on Tang Bo's face and shook his head, deciding to keep the details of the kidnapping to himself. He simply told Tang Bo that he had rescued someone and left it at that. As Tang Bo listened to Zhang Wei's words, his eyes widened with realization that the kidnappers would have been ruthless, and yet Zhang Wei had still managed to save Yulei. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration for his friend's courage and bravery in the face of danger. Tisk, brother Zhang. Why do I feel like you've changed? Tang Bo's voice was tinged with suspicion as he leaned in closer. Hey, brother, how did you disappear into thin air a few hours ago? Don't keep me in the dark, teach me as well. Zhang Wei narrowed his eyes in suspicion, but then noticed that Tang Bo was not entirely sober. Shaking his head, he decided to ignore the question and made his way up the stairs towards the Dragon Lady's room. Tang Bo stumbled after him, still muttering under his breath about Zhang Wei's mysterious disappearance. As Zhang Wei ascended the iron stairs, they creaked and groaned beneath his feet, producing a metallic noise that echoed throughout the bar. The sudden noise grabbed the attention of everyone present, and they all turned to look at him. Even in their sober state, they knew better than to ignore someone climbing up to the Dragon Lady's lair. Zhang Wei continued up the stairs, ignoring the stares and whispers of the people around him. Finally, he reached the top, where two intimidating bodyguards stood guard before the Dragon Lady's door, their eyes like those of fierce tigers, ready to pounce at any moment. Tang Bo, who had recovered from his initial shock, watched in disbelief as Zhang Wei continued towards the Dragon Lady's room. Is brother Zhang insane? Why is he going there, he thought to himself, before quickly running after Zhang Wei, hoping to prevent him from making a grave mistake. The two bodyguards stepped forward, arms crossed in front of their chests, effectively blocking Zhang Wei's path. Hold on there, buddy. You can't just barge in here, the male bodyguard gruffly spoke. This room belongs to the Dragon Lady and you need her permission to enter. The first bodyguard, Brick, was a burly man with a shaved head. His muscular arms, covered in tattoos, and his deep voice rumbled like thunder. The second bodyguard, Raven, was a lean and wiry woman with short cropped hair. Her piercing blue eyes glinted in the dim light and she moved with a lithe grace that belied her strength. Suddenly, Tang Bo appeared from behind, stepping forward nervously with a smile, trying to explain the situation. "Please, guys, my friend here is new in town, and he doesn't know the rules," he gestured towards Zhang Wei. "He means no harm. He only wanted to see the rumored dragon lady. Don't worry, I will educate him on the rules so that he doesn't repeat this mistake." As Tang Bo spoke, Brick and Raven exchanged a skeptical glance. They had heard countless excuses before and were unimpressed. However, Tang Bo's earnestness gave them a moment of hesitation. "Make sure he understands the rules," Raven warned, her voice low and serious. "We won't be so forgiving next time." Tang Bo nodded gratefully, relieved to have avoided trouble. Zhang Wei, on the other hand, was undeterred. He brushed past Tang Bo and headed towards the door, his eyes fixed on the dragon lady's room. His conviction was evident in his voice as he declared, "I know what I'm doing. I need to speak to the dragon lady, and I won't leave until I do." The bodyguards were caught off guard and tensed up, their hands hovering over their weapons. They were used to dealing with troublemakers, but Zhang Wei was different. He was determined and fearless, and they didn't know how to handle him. Finally, one of the bodyguards stepped forward, his voice low and menacing. "I'm sorry, but you leave us no choice. You need to leave now," he said firmly. Zhang Wei stood his ground, his eyes blazing with determination. "I won't leave until I get what I came for," he said, his voice rising with each word. "Dragon Lady, I'm here to make a deal with you." The bodyguards tensed up at the sound of Zhang Wei's voice, and one of them raised his hand to stop him. "You can't just barge in here and demand to see the Dragon Lady. She has better things to do than deal with the likes of you," he growled. Zhang Wei was undeterred by the warning and continued to shout, hoping to catch the Dragon Lady's attention. Suddenly, a loud creaking sound interrupted the standoff, and the door slowly opened. The Dragon Lady peeked out, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Zhang Wei. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice cold and sharp. Zhang Wei took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I have information that you might find valuable, information that could help you in your business dealings," he said, trying to sound confident. The Dragon Lady studied him for a moment before nodding her head. "Come inside," she said, stepping back to allow him entry. Tang Bo watched in amazement as Zhang Wei disappeared into the Dragon Lady's room. "I can't believe he did that," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. "That boy has got some guts." Inside, the whole room was glowing with a faint red light, giving it a similar appearance to a love hotel. There were even flowers on the bed, as if the Dragon Lady was waiting for someone. There was another single door, probably leading to the bathroom. Overall, it was spacious but not a luxurious place to live. This showed that the Dragon Lady wasn't one to chase after luxury. Was it Yifeng? Zhang Wei couldn't help but mutter to himself. Today was the Dragon Lady's birthday and her room had been extravagantly decorated. It seemed like there was no doubt that it was all for Yifeng. But what surprised Zhang Wei was that the rose petals on the bed were untouched. Did they do nothing? He couldn't help but think of Tang Bo's earlier words. Feeling caught, the Dragon Lady snapped, "What are you staring at?" Her eyes narrowed and her annoyance was palpable as she realized Zhang Wei was blatantly spying on her place. Zhang Wei chuckled and said, "It's you, of course," as he casually took in her striking appearance. "For a gang leader, you sure are quite a beauty." The Dragon Lady's gaze narrowed as she found Zhang Wei's comment unpleasant. Although she was indeed beautiful, she wasn't accustomed to men flirting with her. Zhang Wei couldn't help but notice the Dragon Lady's stunning appearance. Her long black hair was subtle yet striking, cascading down her back in loose waves. But it was her piercing dark blue eyes that truly captivated him. They sparkled with a fierce intensity that could both intimidate and enchant. As his eyes roamed over her body, he couldn't help but notice the intricate tattoos that covered her skin. But upon closer inspection, he realized that they weren't just for decoration. They were used to cover marks, possibly from numerous violent fights. And there were even some gun-shot marks that were cleverly concealed within the tattoos. Despite her fierce appearance, the Dragon Lady's aura didn't exclude a certain vulnerability that intrigued Zhang Wei. He could sense that she was a strong woman who had been forced into her current circumstances, becoming the leader of a gang. But beneath that tough exterior, he sensed a woman who was in need of companionship and someone to confide in. We are able to discern other people's personalities with a glance due to automatic appraisals and information contained in our DNA within our body, a concept given by Paul Ekman. There are even multiple relationships found between how the face structure itself grows and a person's personality. A/N. I am not explaining it here. Chapter 43 Striking a Deal with Long Yufei. 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. == Status. Name. Long Yufei, the Dragon Lady, leader of the White Tigers gang. Age. 24. Body rank. Tempered body cultivation level. None bloodline. None spirit beast. Night Eagle cultivation talent. Elite talent spiritual root rank. Superior spiritual root == spirit beast. Zhang Wei raised an eyebrow. This was the first time he had seen someone with a spirit beast. As the grumbling lady in the system explained, a spirit beast is a spiritual creature that is connected to the cultivator through their soul. The spirit beast lives in an alternate plane that is inaccessible to humans. Only the possessor of a spirit beast can summon the creature to aid them, and the cultivator can draw power from the spirit beast and use some of its abilities. Normally, one cannot have a spirit beast until they make a contract with it. However, in rare cases, a spirit beast initiates a contract with a cultivator on its own accord. Spirit beasts have no restrictions on traveling to the human plane, but due to the foreign environment here, they prefer not to linger around for long. But she is not a cultivator. How can she have a spirit beast system? Zhang Wei was puzzled. Perhaps she was in a near-death situation when one of the spirit beasts spotted her and made a contract with her to save her life. Other than that, she can't use its powers or summon it until she becomes a cultivator, the system explained. Zhang Wei's fascination with spirit beasts grew, and he couldn't help but imagine the power he could wield with one by his side. However, his excitement was short-lived as he realized that contracting with a spirit beast was not an easy task. He would have to wait until he stumbled upon one naturally, and the chances of that happening were very slim. Aren't you quite bold? In the pretext of information, you came inside and are blatantly staring at me. Do you not fear for your life? The Dragon Lady spoke, her eyes narrowing in annoyance. She was used to people coming to her for information, but this was different. Zhang Wei's boldness caught her off guard, and she couldn't help but feel slightly impressed, even though she was irritated by his presence. Zhang Wei's expression suddenly changed, and he exclaimed, "Oh, you're right. I don't fear for my life. So tell me, Long Yufei, what will you do now?" He took a step closer towards her, his eyes piercing. Long Yufei. What nonsense are you saying? If you have no information, get out right now and don't waste my time, the Dragon Lady snapped, her face brimming with disgust. Zhang Wei tilted his head in confusion. He couldn't believe that she didn't know who Long Yufei was. Your name isn't Long Yufei, he asked, surprised. The Dragon Lady furrowed her brows in confusion, and it was clear that she had never heard of this name before. My name is Rose, I don't know who Long Yufei is. Give me the information you have or scram away, she said, her voice tinged with impatience. Rose's heart raced as she tried to decipher the man's intentions. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about him. Her eyes followed his every move as he strolled past her, his gait impossibly smooth. She couldn't help but frown as he settled down on the bed, the flowers crumpling beneath his weight. Before she could open her mouth to scold him, he spoke up, his voice low and serious. "Don't worry, I do have information for you, one that will affect the whole underground of the Qingyun city." Her heart skipped a beat at his words, realizing the gravity of what he was about to reveal. The underground of Qingyun city was a dangerous place, and any information about it could mean the difference between life and death. She hesitated for a moment before asking the inevitable question, "What do you need in exchange?" Her mind raced as she tried to come up with a suitable offer. Zhang Wei's chuckle snapped her out of her thoughts, sending shivers down her spine. She couldn't quite place it, but there was something unnerving about the way he smiled. "Why don't you first hear the information and then decide what it's worth?" he proposed. Rose narrowed her gaze, her eyes fixated on Zhang Wei as she mulled over his words. After much contemplation, she came to the conclusion that it wasn't a bad deal, and thus, she agreed with him. With a small nod, she signaled her assent to him. Zhang Wei saw her agreement and slowly rose to his feet, his footsteps measured as he gradually approached her. As he drew closer, Rose couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She could feel his eyes boring into her, fixated on her red, shining lips, as if anticipating a kiss. However, before she could react, he abruptly shifted his focus away from her lips and leaned in closer towards her ear, his breath hot against her skin as he began to whisper. Rose frowned as he got too close for comfort, but she remained still, listening intently to Zhang Wei's words. Zhang Wei's lips curved into a sly smile as he leaned in closer to Rose, his eyes twinkling with mischief. He whispered into her ear, revealing a juicy piece of information that would surely make headlines. The information is: the boss of the notorious White Tigers gang, also known as the rumored Dragon Lady, is hopelessly infatuated with a man named Yifeng, he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. She even prepared herself on her birthday to hand over to him, but she suffered a cold rejection, yet again. Now what do you think would happen, Rose? Isn't this a breaking news, enough to shake the whole underworld? Rose's eyes opened wide, her whole body trembling with shock and disbelief as she processed the explosive news that Zhang Wei had just shared with her. This was the last thing she had expected to hear today, and her extreme reaction seemed to confirm that Zhang Wei's guess was spot on. Suddenly, a cold realization washed over Rose. She was also known as the Dragon Lady, the very person that Zhang Wei claimed was infatuated with Yifeng. Summing up the events from today, an extreme sense of anger filled her, as she felt Zhang Wei was low-key mocking her. Her hands clenched into fists as she struggled to contain her anger and frustration. "You pai," she began to curse, but before she could finish her sentence, Zhang Wei caught her mouth to prevent her from uttering any more expletives. With one hand on her mouth, he used the other hand to expertly maneuver her body, spinning her around and pushing her onto the cushiony bed. Rose gasped as she felt the soft mattress beneath her, her eyes meeting Zhang Wei's intense gaze. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she struggled to catch her breath. Zhang Wei couldn't contain his amusement as he watched the woman's distress. It was almost as if she was a helpless prey caught in his trap. The feeling of power was exhilarating, almost as if consumed in a never-ending loop of happiness. With a snap of his fingers, a flame ignited from his thumb, casting a warm glow across the room. Rose's eyes widened in disbelief, and her mind went into overdrive. Had she just witnessed a man conjuring fire from his bare hand? The shock was almost too much to bear, and if her mouth wasn't gagged, she would have let out a blood-curdling scream. Her body tried to stand up on its own, but the weight above her felt like an immovable mountain. The pressure was suffocating, and she struggled to catch her breath. Her mind raced as she tried to come up with a plan, but it became evident that she was no match for Zhang Wei. As the flame flickered and danced in his hand, Zhang Wei's eyes glinted with a dangerous glimmer. He was far more powerful than she had ever imagined, and that realization sent shivers down her spine. Zhang Wei's grin widened as he watched the woman's disbelieving expression. He felt a sense of satisfaction at the fear he was able to instill in her. It was almost as if she was a mere puppet in his hands. Now, listen carefully, he said, his voice low and menacing. I will release you in 1 minute. But once you're free, you will tell me everything you know about Yi Feng and your relationship with him. And make no mistake, if you try to play any tricks, I will burn you with the same flames. As he spoke, the small flame in his hand grew bigger and brighter, casting an eerie glow across the room. The heat emanating from it was intense, and Rose could feel the sweat beads forming on her forehead. Her eyes bulged out in disbelief as she witnessed the supernatural display right in front of her. This man was not to be trifled with. He was a real magician, and the power he wielded was beyond her comprehension. With an ugly expression on her face, she nodded, her fear palpable. She knew that one wrong move could lead to her demise. Zhang Wei smiled in satisfaction. He could sense the fear and desperation in her face, and it only fueled his sense of power. Chapter 44 Striking a Deal with Long Yufei, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. No updates tomorrow, compensating chapters would be released today itself. Zhang Wei listened intently as Rose, though hesitant, recounted every detail of her small journey with Yi Feng from beginning to end. She described how she had met him for the first time, when she had unfortunately been cornered by members of the notorious Red Scorpion gang. It was as if fate had intervened and the hero saving the beauty trope had come to life, as Yi Feng appeared out of nowhere to save her. Even though Rose had already been shot multiple times, Yi Feng's sudden appearance had been a lifeline for her. After rescuing her, he had vanished into thin air, leaving Rose with nothing but a memory of his heroic feat. It wasn't until later, after much searching, that Rose finally discovered his whereabouts. She found him living in a dilapidated slum, in an old broken-down house that he rented. To make ends meet, he sold sausages from a street stall. Despite his humble living conditions, Yi Feng remained a hero in Rose's eyes, and she was determined to repay him for his bravery. As the new shocking revelation sunk in, Rose was left stunned and doubting her own ears. However, as she confronted Yi Feng, she soon came to realize that he was a man who had always avoided trouble. Despite her numerous attempts to take their relationship to the next level, he had always maintained that they were just friends. Rose had made it clear multiple times that she wouldn't drag him into her troubles, but Yi Feng refused to believe that others would behave in the same manner as her. Today was Rose's birthday, and she had hoped that Yi Feng would finally accept her love. However, once again, he had rejected her with the same excuse, leaving her to live alone in her small place. Zhang Wei couldn't help but feel pity for Yi Feng's stubbornness and the nuisance that Rose was feeling. As he shook her head in disappointment, Rose frowned and asked, "Why are you sighing like that?" Zhang Wei smiled wryly and said, "Yi Feng is a strong man, and even if he were married, he wouldn't hesitate to accept someone with a white and influential background." His words were cruel, yet simple to understand. Rose might be able to become his mistress, but nothing more than that. Rose snorted in frustration, as if she had already known this. "I never asked him to take me as his wife, just his mistress." Her words were laced with anger, though it was unclear whether it was directed towards herself or Yi Feng. Zhang Wei sucked in a cold breath, surprised by her confession. He couldn't gauge this woman's thought process. "You did what?" he asked incredulously. Rose looked away, embarrassed as if she didn't want to comment any further. "It has nothing to do with you," she said curtly. Zhang Wei sighed heavily, thinking that this woman was quite devoted, or maybe she was so empty that she needed to hold on to the last straw available to her at all costs. Zhang Wei chuckled inwardly, thinking that perhaps Yulei was slowly becoming like the strange woman in front of him. "Yufei, I don't care about Yi Feng, but I have a deal for you," he said, his voice low and serious. "What is it?" asked Rose, her suspicion evident in her tone. She completely ignored the foreign term that Zhang Wei had used to address her. Zhang Wei took a deep breath before announcing, "Hand over the gang to me." Rose's eyes widened in surprise at his audacious request. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice laced with confusion. I want to take over the gang, Zhang Wei explained. I know that you're the one in charge now, and I believe that you have the power to make this happen. Rose regarded him skeptically, her eyebrows furrowed in confusion. She wasn't sure what to make of his proposal, and her doubts were evident in her cold, calculating voice. Why would I hand over my gang to you? She asked, eyeing him warily. Zhang Wei met her gaze steadily, his eyes unflinching. Because you have no other choice, he replied simply. And I can become your backer, helping you take over the whole underworld. Rose couldn't help but let out a sudden, unexpected giggle. It was as if she had just heard the best joke of her life. If I have no choice, why bother asking for my opinion? She said fearlessly. Zhang Wei narrowed his eyes, taken aback by her sudden change in demeanor. He thought for a moment before coming to a conclusion. It sounds like someone is forcing you to be here, he said, his tone even. Zhang Wei realized that Rose wasn't laughing at him, but rather at the person who had forced her into her current situation. He understood that the similarity of the situations had triggered a phenomenon called transference, causing her to react to him as she would to that person. Rose was startled and pressed her lips together, looking away as if not wanting to reveal more information. Zhang Wei simply shrugged, not particularly interested in hearing her sad backstory. Zhang Wei asked once again, so, are you willing to hand over the gang to me? Rose smiled wryly and said, do what you want. She felt that negotiating with him was pointless. He was like a god with supernatural powers, and there was nothing she could do to resist him. Zhang Wei shook his head, realizing that she still didn't understand his proposal. I don't want to run your gang, he explained. You would continue to be the leader, reporting only to me. Do you understand that now? Rose's eyes trembled, and she declared, I am not your slave. Zhang Wei chuckled and replied, then become one. Rose's eyes flew open in shock, but she refrained from commenting on the audacity of Zhang Wei's words. He could see the indecision in her gaze and chuckled, confident in his power over her. Yi Feng may be strong, but he can't save you from me. Your attraction to him is merely a result of your loneliness. You have two options. Become my slave willingly, or I will make you one by force. Although Rose was infuriated with Yi Feng, Zhang Wei believed that she was not beyond repair. He could have simply taken her as his slave by force and branded her with his seal, but he found her loyalty-based personality quite endearing. It would be better if she become loyal to him, so he decided to give her a chance to choose for herself. Her eyes narrowed as she fell silent, contemplating her options. She knew her own heart better than anyone. Rose's eyes narrowed as she regarded Zhang Wei with suspicion. How do you know that Yi Feng is strong? Were you spying on us? She asked, her tone laced with skepticism. Zhang Wei chuckled, his eyes gleaming with amusement. No, I don't have time to spy on you, he replied. I can just tell who is weakling from distance. Rose's face twisted in confusion. Weakling, she muttered, her mind struggling to comprehend how powerful someone would have to be to consider Yi Feng as weak. After a moment of contemplation, Rose let out a deep sigh. I don't want to pledge myself to someone weaker than me, she declared firmly, her eyes flashing with determination. I won't be slave of a weakling either. Zhang Wei's face twisted into a scowl, and he felt like slamming her head against the wall in frustration. Miss Rose, look at yourself. You can barely stand up, let alone fight me. I could overpower you easily, and you would be completely helpless. What more do you need to understand that I am already stronger than you? He spat. But Rose was undeterred. Her eyes burned with an intense fire, and she stood her ground with unwavering determination. Without your powers, she demanded, her voice ringing out clear and firm. Zhang Wei blinked in disbelief, taken aback by her boldness. What? Are you serious? He asked incredulously. I said fight me without your powers, she repeated, her voice unwavering. A sly smile crept onto Zhang Wei's lips as he considered her challenge. He knew that he could easily defeat her without his powers, but he decided to play along. Alright, you asked for it. But don't say I didn't warn you, he chuckled darkly, his eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. Chapter 45 The End of One Battle, the Start of Another. 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Wei slowly released his grip on Rose, his fingers loosening their hold on her arms. As he stepped back a few paces, she let out a long sigh, grateful to finally be free from his grasp. Her muscles were stiff and sore from being restrained in the same position for so long, and she eagerly stretched her arms out to loosen them up. Turning to face Zhang Wei, Rose offered him a mischievous grin. Want a weapon? She asked, her voice laced with playful challenge. Without waiting for his answer, she reached over to her bedside drawer and pulled out two gleaming knives, their blades catching the light and glinting menacingly. As she held out the weapons to him, she couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. She had been waiting for this moment for weeks, ever since she first started training with her knives. She needed a worthy opponent to test her skills. And now, with Zhang Wei standing before her, she felt confident that she could take him down. But to her surprise, Zhang Wei shook his head. No thanks, he said, his voice calm and measured. I think I'll stick to my fists for now. Rose's smile faltered for a moment, her eyes narrowing in confusion. Why wouldn't he want a weapon? Was he trying to play some sort of mind game with her? But then, as she watched him step forward and raise his fists in a defensive stance, a new sense of excitement washed over her. She had always been more comfortable with her knives, but there was something thrilling about facing off against an opponent with nothing but her bare hands. With a smirk, Rose darted forward, her fists flying as she launched into a flurry of punches and kicks. Zhang Wei met her blow for blow, his movements fluid and graceful as he danced around her, ducking and weaving to avoid her attacks. The two of them circled each other, locked in a deadly dance, their bodies moving in perfect sync as they fought for dominance. For the next several minutes, the room was filled with the sound of grunts and thuds as the two fighters battled it out. Rose felt her muscles burning with exertion, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to keep up with Zhang Wei's lightning-fast movements. But even as she fought with all her might, a small part of her couldn't help but wonder if she was in over her head. Zhang Wei was a skilled fighter, after all, and she knew that if she wasn't careful, he could easily take her down. But then, just as she was starting to feel her strength wane, she saw an opening. Zhang Wei had left himself vulnerable, and she seized the opportunity, launching a fierce punch straight at his chest. With a loud grunt, he stumbled backwards, his feet slipping on the slick hardwood floor. With a triumphant grin, Rose raised her fists in the air, ready to claim victory. But then, just as she was about to deliver the final blow, Zhang Wei sprang back to his feet, his eyes blazing with fury. In an instant, he was on her, his fists raining down on her with a force that left her reeling. For a brief moment, Rose felt as though she was being consumed by the intensity of her pain and the surging adrenaline in her body. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, the fight came to an end. Zhang Wei took a step back, his breathing steady and his gaze fixed firmly on Rose. That was a good fight, he said, his voice betraying no hint of strain or fatigue. You used your powers. Rose protested, unwilling to admit defeat as she wiped the trace of blood from her lips. She had seen his lightning-fast movements, and it was clear that they were not something a mere human could accomplish. Zhang Wei simply shrugged. I didn't use my powers, he said calmly. My body is just more powerful than yours. Aren't you the same? Rose's face fell in confusion. What do you mean? She asked. Did he mean that her body was also stronger than that of a normal human? How was that possible? Zhang Wei's diamond body was capable of defeating Rose much earlier in their fight, but he chose to allow her to experience a fleeting moment of victory before ultimately emerging victorious. This small act of compassion had a profound impact on Rose's perception of him, and she now viewed him in a much more favorable light. As the intensity of emotions between two people increases, so too does the strength of their connection. Memories are formed based on the level of emotion experienced, and their strength is subject to the passage of time. Knowing this, Zhang Wei deliberately put Rose through a range of emotions before finally revealing his true strength. Despite being unable to use his powers, he knew that his superior-ranked body could be used to level the playing field. Rose, having a tempered body herself, would not have considered it cheating if he used his own to fight. From an objective standpoint, it could be argued that Zhang Wei's use of his superior body was cheating. However, as a villain, he was naturally unconcerned about such matters. After all, he was doubtful of the outcome if he relied solely on his skills. Zhang Wei picked up a knife and proceeded to demonstrate what he had meant earlier. "See this," he said, trying to cut his own body with the knife. However, not even a scratch appeared on his skin. Rose's eyes trembled briefly before she spat, "It's still cheating." Zhang Wei shook his head and began to explain to her the concept of different body types. He even went so far as to prove that her body was superior to that of a normal human due to the excessive tempering she had undergone. Rose began to believe his words, realizing that she was indeed better at facing oncoming attacks than her subordinates. Zhang Wei suspected that Rose's superior body might be related to her contract with a spirit beast, but he was not willing to reveal this information just yet. Rose nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She felt better knowing that she also had an edge over others when it came to physical ability. She began to think about how she could train to achieve a body on par with Zhang Wei's. However, her dreams were soon shattered when she learned that cultivating a body was not an easy task. Without proper cultivation, it was even harder and produced scorching pain when done manually with the help of tools. Compared to cultivating a steel body or above, having a tempered body was relatively easy. "How do I learn cultivation?" Rose asked, hearing the term for the first time. Zhang Wei smiled mischievously, believing that the bird had fallen right into his trap. "Become my slave," he replied. He knew that this was the only way she could learn from him. He wouldn't teach cultivation to just anyone, only to have them turn on him later. Rose's eyes narrowed as she remembered who this man was. For a moment, due to the adrenaline from their fight, she had forgotten that he was actually trying to take over her gang. Once the realization hit her, her face contorted with bitterness. However, she knew that he had already defeated her, and she was not someone who would not keep her end of the bargain. After a deep sigh and a resolute look, she said, "What do I have to do?" Zhang Wei's grin grew even wider. Rose was unaware of the impending consequences of accepting a slave seal, but he still explained the procedure to her. Soon after, Zhang Wei received the notification that Rose had officially become his slave. Slaves. 1. Leng Yan. Age. 23. Female. Initial stage of core formation realm 2. Long Yufei, Rose. Age. 24. Female. Chapter 46. The end of one battle, the start of another. 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rose gazed at Zhang Wei with suspicion. "Why are you grinning like an idiot?" She couldn't help but wonder what was going through his mind. However, her curiosity was short-lived as Zhang Wei's grin grew even wider. In a surprising move, he swiftly slapped her firm ass, leaving Rose wide-eyed and bewildered. Before she could utter a word, Zhang Wei spoke in a firm tone, "A slave should never disrespect his master." Rose's frown deepened, and she gazed at him with a mixture of confusion and helplessness. She hated being treated like a slave, but she had no choice in the matter. As Zhang Wei browsed through the shop, his eyes finally landed on what he had been searching for. A glint of excitement shone in his eyes. Rose watched him carefully, her mind racing with questions. What was he planning? What was he going to do next? Equals 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 equals. Pills. The Vitality Restoring Pill. It is a basic grade pill that is used to restore vitality to the body. It is made from rare herbs and minerals that are known for their rejuvenating properties. When consumed, the pill immediately begins to work, repairing damage to the body and restoring lost vitality. It is especially effective for healing injuries and wounds, as well as restoring energy after a long battle or period of cultivation. Rank. Basic grade cost. 100 villain points. Available points. 120 equals 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 equals. Zhang Wei was at a loss with his 120 points, unable to find any significant use for them. It was then that he thought of buying something for Rose, knowing that every woman loves beauty. But he had an ulterior motive too. He wanted to test her loyalty towards him and see if she would still be faithful without the assistance of the system. This was the first step towards that. Take this, he said firmly, as he bought the pill and extended it towards her, showing it to her. Rose's eyes narrowed suspiciously as she slowly picked up the pill, examining it closely. "What is this?" she asked, her voice laced with doubt. "It's a healing pill. It will fix your wounds and scars," Zhang Wei explained, trying to sound as convincing as possible. Rose looked at him for a brief moment before letting out a soft laugh. "These scars are from battles, they are my battle scars. I don't need this," she said proudly, refusing to take the pill. Zhang Wei shook his head in disbelief, his eyes fixed on the pill resting in her palm. The light glinted off its surface, making it seem almost otherworldly. He refused to take it, his curiosity piqued by the tattoos on her arm. "If they are battle scars, why are they hidden within tattoos?" he asked, his voice low and accusatory. "Don't expect me to sugarcoat my words, but most women prefer an unblemished body over a scarred one. Scars don't look good on them." She looked hurt for a moment, her eyes darting between the pill and Zhang Wei's stern face. A lump formed in her throat, making it hard to speak. "Let me ask you again, are you taking it or not?" Zhang Wei asked. Zhang Wei's words had created a tense atmosphere, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of his judgment bearing down on her. She smiled weakly, her hand hovering uncertainly over her mouth. "Would he really not give me this again? Should I take it?" she thought, her heart racing with indecision. Finally, she made up her mind and swallowed the pill. It was tasteless, but it didn't matter to her. As the pill worked its magic, she felt a warmth spread through her body, like a soothing balm. The fatigue from the battle began to fade away, leaving her feeling completely rejuvenated. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the sensation of her skin beginning to heal. It was like tiny needles pricking her, but in a good way. Slowly, she opened her eyes and looked at Zhang Wei, feeling grateful for his help. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Zhang Wei nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You're welcome," he said, his voice gentle. She nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. Zhang Wei was right, and she knew that she would never forget his words. For the first time in a long time, she felt comfortable in her own skin. Suddenly, her expression turned awkward as she made a shameless request. "Do you have one more?" she asked, her tone pleading. Zhang Wei's face twitched in irritation. Wasn't she acting all proud a few moments ago? He sighed and decided to ignore her request for now. He didn't have any more pills, and even if he did, he didn't feel inclined to give her another one. Finally, his eyes darted to the perfectly made bed, adorned with fresh sheets and fluffy pillows, as if it was waiting for the couple to spend their first night together. The scent of lavender and rose petals wafted through the air, adding to the ambience of the room. "Now that you're healed, let's begin," he said, his voice low and smooth as he moved towards her, like a predator stalking his prey. Rose, who had been jubilantly celebrating her newfound health, suddenly froze. Begin what? Her mind was in a fog, but when she saw Zhang Wei approaching her, her survival instincts kicked in. Without thinking, she leapt backward, her body soaring through the air before landing gracefully on the bed. It was a feat that should have been impossible for any ordinary human, but her body moved with a fluidity that bordered on supernatural. No, no, no. This wasn't part of the deal. Her voice trembled as she saw Zhang Wei standing in her previous spot, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She could feel his gaze burning into her, like a branding iron searing her flesh. Zhang Wei's laugh echoed through the room, his amusement palpable as he watched Rose's confusion and fear. "I think you are forgetting your position here, Miss Rose," he taunted, his voice dripping with malice. Rose's face twisted in anger, but it quickly turned to one of horror. "No. This wasn't part of the deal," she protested. Zhang Wei's laughter only grew louder. "Then what? You would continue to wait for that bastard who doesn't even care." He stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming. "Let me give you a piece of advice. The bed is already prepared. Don't resist needlessly because, with the salve seal on your body, you can't really deny if I give orders." Rose's mind raced with fear and confusion. I can't resist his orders. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks, and she felt like a trapped animal. Suddenly, she smiled bitterly. Zhang Wei was already a powerful magician in her eyes, so why did she accept being his slave without thinking of the consequences? So those weren't some blank words, but a magical chant. As she thought about it, she realized that there must have been magical chanting spells to bind her soul to him. The very thought of this sent chills down her spine, and she wondered if there was any way to break the spell and regain her freedom. Chapter 47 Rose 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rose's heart raced as she tried to negotiate with Zhang Wei, who was getting dangerously close with each passing moment. Suddenly, without warning, Zhang Wei grabbed both of her legs and pulled her onto the bed. Rose let out a small scream as she fell onto the soft mattress, feeling trapped and helpless. "Do you think there is any better time than today?" he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "What should I say? Happy birthday." Haha. Rose knew that resistance was futile, but she refused to give in without a fight. She braced herself against the bed, trying to push him away, but he was too strong. As the conflicting thoughts raced through her mind, she felt overwhelmed and uncertain. She knew that she had to find a way out of this situation, but she wasn't sure how. Suddenly, a wave of humiliation crashed over Rose as she pictured her subordinates catching her in this helpless state. Her head shook involuntarily in embarrassment, trying to shake off the mortifying thoughts. But it was too late, her mind had already begun to spiral. All of a sudden, it hit her like a ton of bricks. "The door," she stammered, her voice quivering with panic. Zhang Wei stopped his playful antics, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "What door? It's closed, isn't it?" he asked. Rose's face flushed crimson, her embarrassment growing by the second. "It's not soundproof," she blurted out, the words tumbling out of her mouth uncontrollably. A smirk played on Zhang Wei's lips as he pieced together the situation. "So you mean they can hear you moan?" he chuckled, his voice dripping with amusement. Rose's face contorted with frustration. "No, that's not what I meant," she protested, but her voice trailed off as she realized the truth. "Yes. They can hear it," she exclaimed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "Don't you understand? This is not the right time." Zhang Wei chuckled, his eyes sparkling with mischief as he caught both of Rose's hands, pinning them behind her back. Rose's protests died on her lips as he pressed his body against hers, his lips capturing hers in a heated kiss. She tried to speak, but the words were muffled against his mouth, and soon she found herself lost in the sensation of his lips on hers. Her body tingled with desire as he deepened the kiss, his tongue slipping between her lips to explore her mouth. Zhang Wei abruptly broke the kiss and gazed down at Rose, his eyes smoldering with desire. What do you mean the door isn't soundproof? He whispered, his voice thick with passion. We fought all the way here, and the noise we made was deafening. Don't tell me they don't care about their leader. Rose narrowed her eyes at him, a hint of resentment in her voice. They probably thought you were the one getting beaten. Zhang Wei gave a slow nod, his lips curving into a wicked grin. Then it's even better. Let them hear your moans, let them hear who the new boss is in this place. Rose could feel her face turning red with a burning sense of humiliation as she imagined her subordinates hearing her moans. She whispered back, her voice barely audible, I don't know. Zhang Wei's lips were on hers again, and his hands roamed over her body, igniting a fiery response in her. Don't worry about them, he whispered, his words sending shivers down her spine. Just focus on us. Rose let out a soft moan as Zhang Wei deepened the kiss, their bodies coming together in a passionate embrace. The heat between them was intense, and she could feel her worries fading away. As the kiss broke, Zhang Wei looked at her with a satisfied smile. Suddenly, Rose spoke up, her voice trembling with urgency, release my hands. Zhang Wei laughed, do you take me for an Edie? Rose cut him off, I won't resist. Just release them, please. They're starting to hurt. Zhang Wei raised an eyebrow, surprised by her sudden demand, but then released her hands. His fingers lingered on her wrists for a moment before letting go. I didn't know you were that eager, he teased. Rose rubbed her wrists, relishing in the tingling sensation that lingered. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a hint of vulnerability. I just don't want to be restrained, she murmured softly, feeling exposed. But the pull she felt towards him was too strong to resist. In a sudden moment, a mysterious man appeared in front of her, and she didn't know how to react. Was she an unfortunate soul or blessed with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? With determination, she locked eyes with Zhang Wei, her face faintly glowing with a red hue. You said you would be my backer, is it true? She asked. Zhang Wei narrowed his gaze, slowly nodding. This was his plan, but why was she repeating his words? Will you also teach me those magic tricks? She asked. It's called cultivation, but yes, I will teach you. So. Zhang Wei corrected her. Rose nodded briefly, a strange look on her face as she reconsidered. It wasn't all that bad. She found herself eyeing Zhang Wei, finding him particularly pleasing to her eyes. As if making a decision, she suddenly turned around and mounted him. Zhang Wei frowned, showing no reaction. What do you want to do? He asked, suspicion in his voice. Rose's mind raced as she mounted Zhang Wei. She couldn't believe what she was about to do, but there was no turning back now. She found herself eyeing him up and down, taking in his features. He was undeniably attractive, and she couldn't help but feel a pull towards him. Zhang Wei's frown deepened as she started to unbutton his shirt. What are you doing? He asked, suspicion clear in his voice. Rose let out a dry laugh, trying to hide her nervousness. Trying to please my master. What, can't I even compete now? She said sarcastically, her voice shaking slightly. As she continued unbuttoning his shirt, her hands trembled. The thought of what she was doing was outrageous, but she couldn't resist the temptation. She wanted to find some bliss in her hopelessness, and if Zhang Wei was her ticket to the top, then so be it. Finally, she managed to undo all the buttons, revealing his smooth chest underneath. She couldn't help but take a moment to admire it before leaning in to kiss him. Zhang Wei's breath hitched in his throat as he sucked in a sharp, cold breath. He had anticipated that finding a true slave who would serve him without activating the slave seal and follow his orders would be an arduous task, but it had turned out to be surprisingly effortless. The sky was a brilliant shade of blue, and he felt a sense of triumph wash over him. As his gaze roamed over Rose, he couldn't help but acknowledge her undeniable beauty. Her skin was as soft as silk, and her lips were full and inviting. But his mindset had changed, and he yearned for a harem. He pushed aside any thoughts of comparing her to Yulei, and his hands began to explore every inch of her body. Rose was nervous at first, her body tense with anticipation. But as Zhang Wei's hands roamed over her back, she began to relax into the kiss. Her heart raced with excitement as she realized she had yet to experience the euphoric pleasures of lovemaking. Earlier, Zhang Wei wasted no time in taking Rose's first kiss, leaving her taken aback by his boldness. However, she refused to be passive any longer and decided to take the initiative by initiating the kiss this time. Gradually, she felt her high mock neck top slowly rolling up, revealing her smooth, creamy skin. A surge of desire coursed through her veins as she pressed herself closer to him, her body craving his touch. Nv. Chapter 48 Rose, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. As Rose and Zhang Wei kissed, her body began to heat up. She could feel her heart beating faster, and her breathing became more shallow. Gradually, she felt her high mock neck top slowly roll up, revealing her smooth, creamy skin. A surge of desire coursed through her veins as she pressed herself closer to him, craving his touch. Zhang Wei's hands were like magic as they roamed over her body. She shivered with anticipation as he skillfully removed her bra. She flinched for a moment, but quickly regained her composure and continued to kiss him, hiding her weakness. As the passion between them intensified, Zhang Wei's hands moved down, exposing her long white legs. Rose gasped as she felt his touch on her thighs, sending shivers up her spine. With a last flick, he removed her panties, making her completely naked before him. Before she knew it, Rose was lying below him, lost in the heat of the moment. Zhang Wei's kisses were fierce as he passionately kissed her neck, sending shivers down her spine. Her body started to company operate with him by itself, eagerly responding to his every touch and movement. As he explored her body with his hands, Rose moaned with pleasure. Every touch sent waves of pleasure coursing through her veins, leaving her breathless and wanting more. She surrendered herself to him completely, lost in the ecstasy of the moment. Zhang continued to kiss on her neck, moving down from her collarbone, slowly arriving at her exposed breasts. Zhang continued to kiss her neck, his lips moving down from her collarbone, slowly arriving at her exposed breasts. Rose's body trembled with anticipation as he traced the curve of her breasts with his tongue, sending waves of pleasure through her. She arched her back, offering herself to him completely, as he continued to explore her body with his lips and tongue. She moaned softly, feeling her body respond to his every touch. "Don't stop," she whispered. Zhang Wei smiled at her, his eyes filled with desire. "I won't," he replied, before taking one of her nipples into his mouth. Rose gasped as he sucked on it, sending a jolt of pleasure straight to her core. "Mhnn," she moaned, her fingers tangling in his hair as he continued to pleasure her. Zhang Wei couldn't resist the urge to taste Rose's nipples when she moaned softly in his ear. He moved down to her breasts and pressed his lips against her nipples, savoring the sweet taste of her skin. As he sucked on her nipples, he felt her body quiver with pleasure, and he could hear her moaning softly. Rose moaned, as Zhang Wei continued to knead and squeeze her breasts. He could feel her nipples hardening under his touch, and he knew that she was enjoying every moment of it. He flicked his tongue over her nipple, teasing it with gentle strokes, before biting down on it and sucking it hard. Rose gasped as she felt the intense pleasure wash over her. She arched her back, pushing her breasts closer to Zhang Wei's mouth, as he continued to suck and nibble on her nipples. The sensations were so intense that she couldn't help but moan and whimper with pleasure. Zhang Wei could feel the heat building between them, and he knew that he had to have her. He moved his hands down to her hips, pulling her closer to him, as he continued to feast on her breasts. With every flick of his tongue and every bite of his teeth, Rose's moans grew louder and more urgent. Rose's moan echoed in the room as Zhang Wei let go of her nipples, leaving them hard and tingling with pleasure. He looked up at her with a wicked grin, his eyes glistening with desire, before pulling her into a passionate kiss, his tongue exploring every inch of her mouth. Rose's body trembled with anticipation, knowing that there was much more pleasure to come. "Shouldn't you be pleasing me?" Zhang Wei asked, his voice dripping with seduction as his fingers traced tantalizing circles on her bare skin. Rose's breath caught in her throat as she heard his words, a shiver running down her spine. She had forgotten that she was the one meant to please him, the master of their arrangement. She felt a twinge of discomfort in her legs, but the heat building between them made her forget it momentarily. "Could you please continue? I promise to do better next time," she added quickly, her voice trembling with anticipation. Zhang Wei shook his head, pretending to be disappointed before flashing her a wicked grin. "Of course, my dear," he said, his hands moving to catch her legs and spread them apart, preparing to take her in a way that would leave her breathless and wanting more. Her smooth and hairless pink pussy was a sight to behold, a testament to Rose's meticulous preparation for today's encounter. Zhang Wei savored the sensation of his throbbing member sliding into her tight and welcoming hole, relishing in the primal pleasure of the moment. As he plunged deeper, Rose's body quivered with anticipation and ecstasy, her back arching in delight at the heavenly feeling of his pulsating manhood filling her up. Zhang Wei's skilled movements allowed him to easily navigate the narrow and slippery passage, and he was surprised to find that he had already reached near her hymen. With a raised eyebrow and a look of surprise, he turned to gaze back at her. Despite his limited experience with virgins, Zhang Wei could tell that Rose's hymen was still intact. As he looked back at her with a quizzical expression, she saw his understanding gaze and her breathing quickened with anticipation. "Just push through it," she whispered with a hint of shame. Zhang Wei couldn't help but chuckle at her eagerness. "Is that how you wanted to please me?" he asked with a playful grin. "Well then, my dear little slave, you have succeeded. I am thoroughly pleased." With that, he resumed his slow and steady movements, pushing past the barrier and plunging deeper into her tight and welcoming embrace. On. Rose's eyes fluttered shut as she moaned with pleasure. The sensation was overwhelming, and she felt her body respond eagerly to his touch. The slight hint of pain only added to the pleasure, and she arched her back to take him in deeper. Zhang Wei leaned back, pulling his hips away slightly. "You know they can hear you," he teased, a smirk playing on his lips. Rose's eyes flew open, and she quickly covered her mouth to stifle her moans. Zhang Wei chuckled and slammed his hips forward again, pounding her relentlessly. She didn't seem like the type to want it gentle, anyway. On. Don't. Rose gasped, raising her hands to try and slow him down. She knew that if he continued at this pace, she wouldn't be able to hold back her moans any longer. Her whole gang would know exactly what was going on inside this room. But Zhang Wei had no plans to slow down. He felt her walls tightening around him and moved even faster, his hips thrusting back and forth with an almost frenzied pace. Rose couldn't hold back any longer. MNGH. Her moans grew louder, and she abandoned all restraint. She reached up and grabbed Zhang Wei's shoulders, pulling him close to her so she could kiss him deeply. Their tongues tangled together as he continued to pound into her, sending wave after wave of pleasure coursing through her body. Zhang Wei was relentless in his pursuit of pleasure, and with each passing moment, Rose's body responded to his advances. He continued to pound her in the same position without any break, and although it was intense, she was able to cope with his merciless attacks. As he thrust himself deep inside her, she felt her body tightening, her breaths becoming shorter, and her heart racing. She knew she couldn't hold on any longer. "Wait, she moaned, warning him of what was to come. Suddenly, it hit her like a wave crashing onto the shore. She was consumed by a powerful orgasm that sent her body into a frenzy. Her back arched, and her toes curled as she rode the wave of pleasure. She could feel every inch of Zhang Wei's body against hers, and it only intensified the experience. As the orgasm subsided, Rose's body turned soft, and she collapsed onto the bed. She was spent, but she was also satisfied. Zhang Wei pulled his waist back and rested for a moment before thrusting forcefully inside of her again. His movements were erratic, his breaths becoming shorter, and his dick pulsating. Finally, he reached his peak, and he came all inside of her. Rose could feel his hot cum filling her up, and it only added to the intensity of the moment. They both lay there for a while, catching their breaths, and basking in the afterglow of their intense lovemaking. Rose's eyes fluttered as she struggled to regain consciousness. Her vision was hazy as she looked at Jiang Wei, who was hovering over her. Finally, she managed to form a coherent question, her voice tired and weak, "Did you come inside me? What if I end up pregnant?" She couldn't help but feel a sense of panic as she saw the white liquid mixed with blood flowing out of her vagina. To her surprise, Jiang Wei suddenly smirked and replied, "You can keep the child." Rose's eyes widened in shock, and she shot up from the bed. Only when she noticed Jiang Wei's sly smile did she realize he was joking with her. She let out a sigh of relief and couldn't help but laugh dryly. "If your girlfriend hears you, she will murder you," she added, assuming he had a girlfriend. The room was filled with a tense silence as they both processed what had just happened. Breaking the silence, Jiang Wei shrugged and said, "I don't have a girlfriend." Rose rolled her eyes at his blatant lie, but before she could say anything, Jiang Wei surprised her with his next words. "I have a wife," he said. Rose shivered suddenly, feeling a cold wave wash over her body. "Do you really want me dead this badly?" she asked, half-jokingly. Jiang Wei laughed at her reaction. "Don't worry," he said. "She's harmless at least to me." His words did little to reassure Rose. Instead, she found herself sinking into deep thought, wondering what her future fate might be. Sensing her unease, Jiang Wei decided to clear the confusion. "She's just a normal human," he said. Rose's eyes suddenly lit up with hope. "Normal human," she repeated. Jiang Wei nodded, and Rose finally smiled. At least she wouldn't have to fear being chased by a supernatural wife because she stole her husband. As Rose lay there, catching her breath and calming down her chaotic mind, suddenly she felt Jiang Wei stir beside her. She looked over, surprised. "Wait, I thought we were finished," she stammered. Jiang Wei grinned wickedly. "An hour is hardly enough time to satisfy your master," he teased. Rose's face twisted in irritation. He was playing her own game against her. With a resigned sigh, she decided to go along with it, knowing full well she'd regret it later. But as they continued, Rose was taken aback by Jiang Wei's stamina. He kept going and going, filling her over and over again. And with his newfound skills, Jiang Wei no longer had to worry about unwanted pregnancies. He could cream pie her without any issues. Chapter 49 Ye Foam Regret, the plot armor glitched. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On slow down. The woman's voice trembled as she gasped for air, trying to keep up with the relentless pace. I am tired," her words came out in short, labored breaths, and her legs felt like they were going to give out any moment. "MNGH," a low groan escaped her lips as she struggled to keep moving, her muscles protesting with each step. "TCH, the lucky bastard," Brick, the male bodyguard guarding outside, clicked his tongue in annoyance. "She is still the boss," Raven, the female bodyguard, elbowed him, her eyes darting around nervously. She knew better than to speak ill of the powerful woman they were sworn to protect. Jiang Wei may have tamed their dragoness, but it didn't mean they could stop fearing her and challenging her authority. The woman inside that room was a force to be reckoned with, and they knew it all too well. The whole bar was now empty except for a few people, including Tang Bo, who had chosen to mind their own business and occasionally glance up at the top of the room. Earlier, the place had been packed to the brim, with a huge uproar that had filled the air. At first, they had thought their leader was teaching the newbie a lesson, but then the unmistakable sounds of moaning confirmed what was actually happening, causing an even bigger uproar. However, the commotion didn't last long. After an hour, most of the members started to feel irritated and left to find prostitutes to relieve their pent-up frustration. Now, only a handful of gang members remained in the bar, and the entry for outsiders had been closed for obvious reasons. The atmosphere was tense, and no one dared to speak out of turn, knowing that their leader was not to be disturbed. Right then, few steps echoed from the main entrance. Step step. As the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, Raven's frown deepened with each rising step. Her senses were on high alert, sensing bad vibes from the new arrival. The others in the room also turned to look, their curiosity piqued. Finally, the person came into full view, and everyone's hearts trembled in unison. It was Yi Feng, moving slowly and steadily towards them. The air seemed to grow heavy with tension as they watched him approach. After much contemplation, Yi Feng had come to give Rose a chance by agreeing to be in a relationship with her. His clothes were stained and dirty, as if he had just come from his roadside stall. The others in the room couldn't help but stare at his disheveled appearance, puzzled by his sudden appearance. Why are they all staring at me weirdly? Have I become more handsome? Yi Feng frowned, feeling self-conscious under their scrutiny. Despite the strange gazes, he remained undaunted, his proud face and grin unwavering as he began to climb the stairs. As Yi Feng made his way up the stairs, his ears suddenly perked up at the sound of a strange noise coming from the top. It was a moan, followed by a soft gasp. He knitted his brows in confusion, turning to look at Raven and Brick for an explanation. But before they could say anything, the moaning grew louder, filling the entire place with an unmistakable sound. The closer Yi Feng approached, the more the voice became clear, and he suddenly recognized the owner of the voice. His feet felt like they had turned to ice, and his face twisted into an expression of disgust and anger. It was Rose who was making those sounds. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, and his mind raced with 1,000 questions. Why was she making those noises? Who was she with? His heart sank as he realized the truth. As he heard Rose's moans, Yi Feng felt a pang of jealousy mixed with betrayal. Although he had never considered Rose to be his girlfriend, he still felt hurt by the thought of her being with another man. He couldn't help but wonder if his reaction was due to his own hypocrisy or arrogance. Raven, who was aware of Yi Feng's immense powers, spoke up in an attempt to calm him down. Yi Feng, please be patient, she said, her voice shaking slightly with nervousness. Yi Feng turned to look at her, his eyes blazing with anger. Raven shivered by his gaze and turned silent. Yi Feng knew that Raven was right. He needed to stay calm and rational. But the thought of Rose being with someone else was too much for him to bear. He took a deep breath and tried to compose himself, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts and emotions. Yi Feng's fists clenched even tighter, and his eyes burned with fury as he asked, "Is she alone?" Raven froze, unsure of how to reply. But before she could say anything, Brick spoke up from behind her with a twisted grin on his face, "The dragon lady is with her special guest right now. You better come back later." The words hit Yi Feng like a ton of bricks. He felt a mix of anger, hurt, and betrayal all at once. Rose was with someone else, and he had been foolish to believe that she was interested in him. Without another word, Yi Feng turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts and emotions. He knew that he needed to stay calm and rational, but the pain of betrayal was too much to bear. As Yi Feng stormed out of the room, he could feel the eyes of the other men on him, their smiles mocking and triumphant. He knew that they had all resented him for rejecting Rose time and time again, and now they were relishing in his pain. As he stepped outside, his eyes scanned the surroundings and found a towering concrete wall blocking his way. His fists clenched in anger, and he marched towards it with a determined stride. The wall loomed over him, mocking him with its impenetrable surface. Without a second thought, he balled his fist and struck it with all his might. A deafening boom echoed through the empty street, and the wall quivered under the impact. But his victory was short-lived. As he pulled his hand back, he winced in pain, his knuckles scraped and bleeding. Yet, he refused to let the wall defeat him. With a heavy heart, he turned his back on it and trudged towards his broken bicycle, the only witness to his futile battle. He mounted it and rode it back home, his mind consumed with thoughts of revenge, his eyes bloody red whole way back to home. Today, Yi Feng's plot armor seemed to have failed him. It was as if fate had conspired against him, leaving him vulnerable and exposed. In the past, he had been able to make any woman wait for him as long as he wanted, and they would still be crazily infatuated with him, ready to do his bidding. This had led him to develop an inflated sense of self-importance, believing that they didn't have their own minds to think for themselves. But the harsh truth was that nobody in this world waits for anyone. Life moves on, even in the face of death. People carry on, eventually forgetting the names of even the greatest of rulers like Emperor Song. It was a sobering thought, reminding Yi Feng of his own mortality and insignificance in the grand scheme of things. If anyone is naive enough to assume that a woman or man would want to wait for them for ages, then it is only their ignorance. The reason why someone may be waiting is not that they love you unconditionally, but it is because they have not found someone better yet. An enlightened skull. The idea that someone would willingly wait for another person for an extended period is a delusion born out of ignorance. The truth is that people do not wait for anyone out of love or loyalty, but out of their own self-interest. It is a harsh reality that people are always looking for something better, and if someone is willing to wait for you, it is only because they have not found something more worthwhile. The notion that people will wait around for you indefinitely is a foolish one, and it is essential to recognize this truth. Love is not about waiting for someone to come around, but about mutual respect and understanding. It is a transactional relationship, where both parties receive something of value. If you cannot offer something of value to the other person, then there is no reason for them to wait around for you. In the end, waiting for someone is not a sign of love, but of foolishness. It is essential to be honest with yourself and others about your intentions and to accept that people are not objects to be possessed or manipulated. Only then can you build a relationship that is based on mutual respect, trust, and understanding, and not on false assumptions and unrealistic expectations. Chapter 50 Smuggling What? You are listening at novelfull.audio. As the clock struck 8 in the evening on March 14, 2023, Zhang Wei finally emerged from the room. He stretched his body, and Raven and Brick's faces twitched simultaneously, having been forced to stand outside for hours. Zhang Wei seemed nonchalant, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, but Raven couldn't help but feel a twinge of shame, wondering just how long Rose and Zhang Wei had been engaging in their intimate activities. Zhang Wei had no intentions of directly commanding the gang, but he wanted to make it clear that there was someone above Rose. He ignored the weird looks he received and strode down the stairs with purpose. Raven's face twitched as she found Zhang Wei to be quite arrogant. Her lips parted slightly, indicating that she was about to speak, but then closed as she hesitated. With a deep breath, she realized that she was still clueless about the true relationship between her boss and Zhang Wei. Suddenly, the screen flickered with a message. Villain points plus 100. And Zhang Wei's eyes widened for a moment in surprise. Doviko. The distribution of points seemed to be getting more and more bizarre with each passing moment. Host, the points are a cumulative reward for owning your first gang and causing mental agony to Yi Feng, the system explained. Wait, Yi Feng was here. Zhang Wei's eyebrows furrowed, but soon a cunning smirk replaced his expression. The outcome was even better than what he had planned. With the 100 points he had earned, the earlier loss of buying the vitality pill for Rose has already been settled, and his investment has already become secure. Lost in his thoughts, he suddenly heard raucous laughter and felt a heavy pat on his shoulder. Tisk, brother, I thought you were here to catch up, but you're already making a deal with our boss. Aren't you moving a little too fast? It was Tang Bo, grinning from ear to ear. Zhang Wei couldn't help but shake his head in disapproval at the sudden opportunist. He knew that these types of people were like poison. Dangerous and harmful. However, if used effectively, they could immensely benefit you. It was a fine balance. Either you use them or they use you, there was no middle ground. But then again, wasn't it the same in all relationships to some extent? Is that how you talk to your new boss? Zhang Wei turned to him and grinned, making their positions clear. Tang Bo's face showed a brief moment of surprise before he quickly regained his composure and laughed again. So, say new boss. Any orders for the gang, he announced in a loud voice, making sure his words were heard in every corner of the bar. Raven and Brick frowned simultaneously, their displeasure evident. They knew that this was equivalent to an open challenge to Rose's authority. Wait, when did you become our boss? Raven's voice boomed from above, effectively halting the uproar like a bolt of lightning. Tang Bo, who was the root cause of all this, fell silent, but his eyes sparkled with mischief as he continued to pull the strings of the situation. Zhang Wei glanced at him with a hint of amusement, his eyes narrowing slightly, before turning his attention back to Raven. So, am I your underling? He asked with a sly smirk, his lips curling up mischievously. Raven's face scrunched up in confusion at the absurdity of the question. How is that possible? She muttered in disbelief. Zhang Wei nodded thoughtfully, his laughter bubbling up from deep within. Yes, how is that possible? He echoed, his tone teasing yet playful. He didn't bother to defend his status, knowing full well that his recent dalliance with her boss had elevated him above the rest of them. At this point, he could have easily become a diplomat, using his charm and wit to navigate any situation. Just ask your boss once she wakes up, but be sure not to disturb her. She's had a long day, Zhang Wei said with a soft chuckle, his eyes twinkling with amusement as he walked out of the room, dragging a disgruntled Tang Bo behind him. Tang Bo's face twisted into an ugly scowl, feeling the iron grip of Zhang Wei's hand on his shoulder as he was helplessly dragged out of the commotion like a ragdoll. As they made their way out of the bar, Tang Bo finally managed to wrench his shoulder free from Zhang Wei's iron grip. He spun around, rubbing his sore shoulder, and laughed with embarrassment. Brother Zhang, it appears you have been hitting the gym hard. Your grip is something else now. Zhang Wei, who didn't have time for small talk, pulled out his phone and showed Tang Bo a photo of a woman. Get her details, find all of her relatives, and make them disappear, he ordered, his tone serious. Tang Bo frowned, taking the phone from Zhang Wei's hand and scrutinizing the woman's picture. After a while, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Killing so many people would get me in trouble, brother, he said, his voice hesitant. The law doesn't care if some street punk dies, but a civilian death might cause an uproar. Zhang Wei took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it up. He blew out a cloud of smoke and smirked. Law, he scoffed. You don't need to worry about it. Just make sure not to get caught on any CCTV. The rest, I will take care of and suppress the case. Trust me, I have connections. Tang Bo's eyes widened in surprise. Brother Zhang would take care of it alone, he thought to himself. His mind raced with questions about what kind of connections Zhang Wei had and what his true motives were. Could he trust him? He couldn't help but fathom the dangerous implications of this assignment. Zhang Wei snatched his phone back without bothering to explain himself to Tang Bo, then he proceeded to send a text to both of his new slaves. He quickly sent a message to Rose with the list of people she needed to protect. It was the reason he had come here in the first place. He then texted Lang Yan, instructing her to handle the matter concerning Hao Yu. The photo he had shown Tang Bo was none other than Hao Yu. Zhang Wei was aware that Hao Yu's relatives could cause trouble if they found out about her sudden disappearance. He didn't want to take any chances and decided to eliminate them. This way, he could focus his attention on the Song family for the time being. Tang Bo snapped out of his trance, nodding his head in agreement. He knew he was taking a huge risk by trusting Zhang Wei's words, but he also saw it as an opportunity to prove his usefulness. Brother, if there's nothing else, may I go? Tang Bo asked, eager to leave. He was a quick learner and adaptable to the situation. Zhang Wei raised his eyebrows, surprised by Tang Bo's eagerness to leave. Why are you in such a hurry? He asked, curious about the sudden change in his behavior. At first, Tang Bo was hesitant to speak, but under Zhang Wei's stern gaze, he had no choice but to spill the beans. As he spoke, Zhang Wei found himself becoming increasingly surprised. Tang Bo was not only involved in forbidden activities in the gang, but he had also established a separate division of his own. Many members of the White Tiger's gang, who were dissatisfied with the gang's functioning, had joined his division. Zhang Wei wasn't surprised to hear this. If Rose didn't allow an underworld gang to function like an underworld gang, it was bound to happen sooner or later. What surprised Zhang Wei the most were the activities that Tang Bo and his people were carrying out. When Tang Bo explained the purpose of his early leave, even Zhang Wei couldn't help but speak out in shock. You're smuggling what?